Hi, my name is Damani Partridge here with the Ann Arbor Film Festival, interviewing Jean Carlomusto, who's the filmmaker for Esther Newton Made Me Gay. Um, I'm a I'm the the chair of the board of the Ann Arbor Film Festival and also a professor at the University of Michigan. And I think Carlomusto is going to introduce herself.
Yes, I'm Jean Carlomusto, and I'm the director and the producer of one of the producers of Esther Newton Made Me Gay. And I came to this piece after pretty much a long history of making films about the LGBTQ plus communities.
And can you just say a little bit about how you arrived at this film in particular? What drew you to Esther Newton?
Well, first of all, I've always considered my work as part of a movement because it grew out of a movement. And so early on, I was documenting AIDS activism. And so I saw very clearly how important it was to create a space for folks to that you could see yourself represented. And so Esther Newton is someone who also has a long history of work. She's really a pioneer in the field of queer studies, and also, I wanted to acknowledge her contribution to anthropology. And I'm so thrilled that the anthropology department is the sponsor of the screening because, I wanted to see Esther be acknowledged for her early work. Esther was documenting drag bars in the Midwest before Stonewall. That was
Mm.
her dissertation. And she'd also written I feel, very important works in the field of anthropology. My Best Informant's Dress is a really important work because it acknowledges desire and also love for our elders as a piece of this vision, and as a piece of ethnography in documenting cultures. So on a more visceral level, Esther and I are kin. We share an ex lover. And also, Esther's partner, Holly, and I also share some kin. So I'd known them for a long time. And in fact, they had been in previous works that I'd made, one called Shotzi is Dying, about the frequent near death experiences of a rescue dog that we had, but it was more about the deep grief that some of us were feeling after years of documenting the AIDS crisis and having so much of this documentation of people alive and making change out on the street, having so much of this documentation sort of subtly shift into memento mori, and it being more a record of our friends who are no longer with us. So the idea of preserving history is important to me. So early on with Esther and Holly, I originally began this in a way as looking at their relationship to this sport called dog agility. And originally, I wanted to do this more as a kind of cultural study of dog agility.
Mm.
But as I got going, because it was very important to Esther, but as I got going with it, I realized, well, a film about dog agility, it would be quite good, but it's not really where I'm going. What really interested me more was Esther's lifelong work. And I wanted to show uh, how she made a space, how this pioneering work made a space for us all. And not just her work, but who she is. I mean, Esther was a butch woman at a time when it cost her jobs. Uh, she was fired from her first teaching job. She was almost fired from her second job at
Mhm.
um, at Purchase University. And so it took a lot of bravery for her to stake out this territory, to be who she wanted to become. And I thought that was a worthwhile journey, particularly because Esther has a very expansive view about our history and also about what's going on right now. And so the fact that she looked at female masculinity as something that was expanding and that was, in fact, a logical, not progression, I would say so much, but a logical extension and ally to the trans movement. You know, that was really important to me, someone who had an expansive view on that.
Thank you. Um, could you talk a little bit about what you see in the film as a relationship between archive and kinship? Because it seems like you use there are lots of archival images. There you talk about the history of the movement and also the relationship to anthropology for Esther Newton. Um, does archive play a particularly important role, do you think, in relationship to kinship?
Well, in the example I was just giving, you know, where that's the one for me that pops up first in terms of uh, how this archival material is often the record, the documentation of our communities. Oh, and I have a dog. I just want, if you hear uh, um, growling or anything over to the side here, there is a dog who will punctuate, and hopefully he will be a good boy and just do nothing but that. Buster, chill out. So, you know, these images are really our scrapbooks in a way, our history. And that's why I've always considered myself allied to groups like Lesbian Herstory Archives, because, you know, they're making a special point to preserve and make available this material, which is our history, and it is our kinship. So that was important. And in the film, in particular, there are some archives that play play an important role. In the lesbian feminist section, there's the archive of Phyllis Berkby, who was actually had been a lover of Louise Fishman, who's also in the film, and her archive, which I believe is at Smith. I'm pretty sure, but her archive was this documentation of this magical time of these lesbians uh, taking to the woods and sort of creating a space, a radical space for lesbian feminism. So, you know, there is this incredible relationship between these archives and um, and and queer kinship.
Um, can you talk a little bit about the choice to begin the film with like this question of kinship, have Esther Newton talking about the symbols of kinship and linking it to anthropology? Like, what, why is anthropology so important to the at least the beginning of the film?
Well, anthropology is important to the entire film because Esther is an anthropologist, and it is her fundamental training. It's the way she sees the world, really, through an anthropological lens. And so I wanted to start the film with the kinship diagram on a number of levels. First of all, to show our relationships um, in a system that isn't tied to heteronormativity and to, traditional bloodlines. I think there we're continuing the work of people like David Schneider, who said, this isn't just about blood. This is about connections and about culture. So I also thought it was, on a more personal level, it was interesting to show my relationship to Esther through this kinship diagram. And the diagram that she shows is it's kind of one that she's making up as she goes along, right? So she doesn't consider herself fully encapsulated as a man or a woman, and so she gives us a square. And she starts from that piece right there. I think it's a beautiful way of showing how Esther is working with the materials at hand to create a more nuanced interpretation of her life and of the people who matter to her.
Thanks. Can you talk a little bit? You started already, but can you say a little bit more about the role of dogs in the film, and how dogs relate to kinship?
Well, Esther says in the film that dogs aren't just in her DNA, they are her DNA. And for her, it really goes back to her most primary relationship with her mother, who was a champion dog breeder, who both gave Esther this. Her passion, really. Esther's life is so much about her relationship to her dogs and the dog world. So I wanted to, even though this is a film about a scholar, it might not seem like a natural wedding between a film about an LGBTQ elder, but also a film about dogs. But in Esther's case, I just felt like I would not be capturing who she really is and what her passions really are if I didn't try and keep on weaving the dog thread through there. And although the film is pretty chronological, the narrative of the dogs is really one area where it kind of breaks chronology and creates a more nuanced chronology, which I like. And actually, I'd say the most challenging part of the film for me was to interweave these two stories together, because at one point in time, they were really threatening to break off into two pretty separate films. And I didn't want to have that happen. I didn't want to do just a straightforward documentary about Esther with maybe just a couple of cutaways of her dogs in the corner at her feet or something, because that's not how Esther functions. Her day is structured around her dogs. So I was editing the film over the course of COVID, and I had a lot of time to basically look at the material and work with the material. And over time, I got the mix to where I wanted it to be. And I have to say, I cut out a lot of the dogs to make it work. But I think for me, it's the part of the film that, because I'm also a dog lover, and because I am a dog lover in part because Esther brought me into this kinship of dogs. And it really goes back in our own history, because my ex, who is her ex, Jane, was introduced to the kinship of dogs by Esther, who made her get this Doberman Shotzi when they were together. So Esther is really also sort of the granddad in this kinship of dogs as well.
Thanks. Can you say, I guess, a little bit about the role of the father, like her relationship with the person she calls her father in the film?
Saul Newton, her relationship to Saul Newton. That was another tricky piece of the film, because Saul Newton is, particularly recently, It has become a figure in the public eye, even though he's been dead for quite some time, because he ran a notorious cult called the Sullivanians. And uh, and so I was faced with this kind of dilemma. In a way, I did not want to let Saul take over one more group. I didn't want to let him take over the film because, in truth, although Esther, he was important to Esther, she never wanted anything to do with the cult. She always thought, she was like, they're a bunch of like weird ass folks, and I want my distance. So I was faced with this kind of balancing act, how I didn't want to write Saul out of it because he definitely was important to her. And I think it was also definitely important since this is the scandal of the Sullivanians has entered into the public eye again. I felt like I needed to at least position that story in relationship to Esther and sort of show, yes, this did exist, but for Esther, this is how it existed. It wasn't like an overwhelming force that she had to break away from. No, it was something from the get-go that she was very clear that she wasn't going to be a part of it. And so, that's how I worked it through in the film. But it's definitely something that needed to be considered. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that when I was making the film one day, it's like Christmas morning, and I was just cleaning off my desk. And I found this MIDI DB tape from 2002. And it was that interview that I had done with Esther. And this is long ago. I think it was around the time I was making a film about my father, and I had interviewed her about Saul. So this interview from 2002 was then sort of processed into the Esther Newton Made Me Gay, because it is an area where she talked very intimately about her relationship with Saul and how, ambivalent it was. She did not think he was a particularly nice guy, but she also acknowledges that in terms of whatever fathering she had, he was there. He was both hated and loved, is what she wrote about him in his obituary for the Times. And I'd like to preserve that kind of complexity in the film, not painting things as, yes, this was good, this was bad. In the case of her father, this was a ambivalent relationship that worked itself out over the course of her life and his life. And in the end, she was one of the children who, looked after him, one of the few children who still maintained contact with him until his death.
Thanks. Can you talk about the title? Why this title?
Yes. Esther was, in terms of her own study of anthropology, she wrote a book early on called Margaret Mead Made Me Gay, which is a wonderful collection of essays. And so her students made up these T-shirts that said, sort of as a kind of take off on that, Esther Newton made me gay. And at one point, one of the people in the film holds up one of those T-shirts. And so I thought it was a good title for the film in terms of showing how Esther made a space. She was a pioneer. And I also like the kind of, ridiculous goading quality, especially now with all this dialogue around groomers and whatnot. Those of us who grew up queer, particularly before Stonewall, if somebody could have made me straight, man, I'd be so straight because everything in my world was functioning to make me straight. And it's almost a ridiculous equation. So it's just as goading and ridiculous to say, "Oh, Esther Newton made me gay." Of course not. I had a very nuanced approach to it, but I think that maybe Esther Newton made me queer. Might have been my first choice, but in terms of its relationship to the film and her students who wanted to pay homage to her, Esther Newton made me gay, is what I went with. Originally, I have to say, when I was working on the film, I was calling it agility because of this sport that she loves. And I also felt because she was so ill when I started doing the film. When I started doing it, she really couldn't run agility. She had a bunch of ailments that prevented her from doing it. And looking at the course of her life and how she was able to navigate obstacles that came up, I thought that it was an apt metaphor for what's going on in the film. But in the end, I wanted to make it more specific to her work.
Mm.
And that's why I went with Esther Newton Made Me Gay.
Thanks. So maybe as a final question, it's kind of two questions. I mean, I wanted to ask about the production. So how long did it take you to make the film? What was the process? And then can you just say something about the Ann Arbor Film Festival, how that is an appropriate venue for the film?
Well, the film took, I would say, about 3 years to make. And part of it wasn't always easy to get funding. We had to do a bunch of crowdfunding to get the film done. So, and there were also there's a lot of different material in this film, a lot of archival material. And fortunately, we had a top-notch archival producer on this, Shanti Avargan and Olivia Streisand. Actually, the two of them did an amazing job in finding all the archival. And it certainly did take time to edit this. The editing of this film is pretty intricate in terms of where it's going and everything. And that doesn't come overnight. Some people will come to a film with a script and they'll just edit the film to that script. That wasn't the process of this film. This film was very much a journey that changed over time, from the beginning, going from agility to looking at Esther's life, which is also an examination of all these important periods of time that I miss because I'm about 20 years younger than Esther, but they were periods of time that I wanted to vicariously explore with her through her life. So it took a while to weave all of this together and then to get the funding. And it's just really important to me that the film is in Ann Arbor. And as I mentioned before, also because it's getting support from anthropology at Ann Arbor. And it's wonderful because Holly Hughes is a professor in Ann Arbor, and they live there, so they're local. So this is really, and a lot of the film was shot in Ann Arbor. Everything in the home and everything. This is all very local, and so it's important to me that it gets shown among their peers and the other locals, folks of Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor Film Festival has a connection as well. One of my past teachers, Susan Zeig and Pat Olesko, were very much involved in the festival early on. And I've always admired the experimental exploration of Ann Arbor, a place where films, all kinds of films, would be valued and displayed and given a place. So it's important to me, and that's one of the reasons why, even though it's a tricky weekend for me, I definitely want to come in for the screening and see the work in situ.
Thanks very much for doing this interview also, and we look forward to seeing the film in person. Look forward to seeing you in person. So thanks.
Same here. Thank you for doing this. For your doing the interview, and also for all your work with the film festival. It's not an easy thing to pull this all off, and I appreciate, along with your teaching responsibilities, that you would take this on. And I wish you good luck.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.